It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Rosie's Diner, the kind of small-town place where everyone knew each other's coffee order. Emily, a 26-year-old waitress with a heart bigger than her paycheck, was clearing a table when she noticed an elderly man in a tattered jacket sitting alone at the counter. He looked exhausted. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the menu. The name tag on his jacket read Staff Sergeant Lewis. He didn't say much, just stared at the pictures of food like he hadn't eaten in days. Emily approached him with a smile. "Hey there, sir. Coffee's on the house today. You want anything to eat?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "I'm good, miss. Just the coffee." But Emily had seen this before. The quiet dignity of someone who served his country and was now forgotten. She brought him a hot meal anyway. "You can pay me back with a story," she said playfully, sliding the plate in front of him. He looked at her with glassy eyes. "That's very kind of you." But as fate would have it, kindness came with consequences. Just as Emily was returning to her station, the manager, Carl, stormed out from the back. "What the hell was that, Emily?" he barked loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "I gave him a meal. He looked like he needed it," she replied, trying to stay calm. Carl's face turned red. "We're not a charity. You don't get to give away food like it's your own pantry. You're fired. Now." The diner went silent. Staff Sergeant Lewis quietly stood up, ashamed, and tried to leave. Emily didn't argue. She just grabbed her apron, folded it, and walked out the door behind him. What they didn't know, was that someone had been watching. And that someone was already making a call that would change everything. Outside the diner, Emily caught up with Staff Sergeant Lewis. "I'm really sorry about that," she said, handing him a paper bag with the rest of the meal she packed in secret. "I don't regret feeding you, though. Not for a second." The old Marine shook his head. "You shouldn't have to lose your job over someone like me." But Emily placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "No one who served deserves to be hungry." A block away, in a black SUV, a young man in uniform sat in silence. He had witnessed the entire scene. Lance Corporal Ramirez had been on leave, grabbing lunch before heading back to base. What he saw hit a nerve deep within him. He didn't just make a call, he made the call. Back at Camp Graywood, 30 miles out, 4 Marines were on training rotation. Gunnery Sergeant Daniels picked up the phone and heard the short, clipped update from Ramirez. An old Marine humiliated. A good woman fired. Location sent. Daniels didn't ask questions. Suit up. Within 10 minutes, 4 Marines, dressed in full-service uniforms, stepped into a Humvee and headed straight for Rosie's Diner. The streets were quiet when they arrived. No sirens. No warning. The door to the diner flew open. People gasped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Dishes clinked as waitresses froze in place. Carl looked up from the register, his face went pale. Gunnery Sergeant Daniels walked straight to the counter, 3 Marines behind him like a wall of honor. "Where's the man who fired the waitress for feeding one of our own?" Daniels asked, his voice cutting through the air like steel. Carl stammered, I was just following protocol, sir." Daniels leaned in. "Then your protocol is garbage." Carl's jaw clenched as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, I respect your service, but this is a business. That girl gave away food without permission." One of the Marines behind Daniels, Corporal Jenkins, stepped forward and placed something on the counter. It was a medal. A bronze star. "She didn't give away food," Jenkins said. "She gave dignity. Something this place clearly ran out of." The customers in the diner began murmuring. Phones were discreetly lifted. Cameras were rolling. A few patrons even stood up in quiet solidarity, including a mother with her young son. Daniels turned back to Carl. "You think we'd let this slide? You fired a woman for doing what this country should be doing, honoring those who served. Carl scoffed. Are you threatening me? Daniels leaned in closer. Not a threat. Just a reckoning. Outside, the scene was drawing attention. 2 police officers had arrived, but when they saw the uniforms, they simply stood back. One of them even nodded in silent approval. Meanwhile, Emily had returned, not because she wanted confrontation, but because she'd forgotten her car keys. When she stepped into the chaos, her eyes widened. Emily, Daniels said calmly, turning to her. You don't know us, but we know what you did. And we don't let acts of honor go unanswered. She blinked, overwhelmed. I just did what I thought was right. You did more than that, Jenkins replied. You reminded us what right looks like. Daniels turned back to Carl and pulled out a phone. Here's what's gonna happen. We're calling every vet, every base, and every local media outlet. Rosie's Diner just made the worst PR move of the year. Carl stammered, you can't, but Daniels cut him off. Too late. It's already live. Within minutes, the story spread like wildfire. A tweet from one of the customers read, waitress fired for feeding a hungry veteran. Then 4 Marines showed up and shut the place down. Never seen anything like it. #HonorFirst #Rosie's Backlash. The post hit 1 million views before Carl could even process what was happening. His phone started buzzing non-stop, calls from the owner, emails from corporate, and angry reviews flooding the diner's pages. Outside, a small crowd had already begun forming. Veterans in caps, bikers from a local military support club, and even a few local journalists arrived on the scene. Some held signs, "We stand with Emily. Feed one, feed all. Honor over policy." Inside, Emily stood stunned. This is too much. I didn't ask for this. Daniels placed a hand on her shoulder. You didn't ask. You earned it. Carl, sweating through his button-up, barked at the crowd. Everyone needs to leave. This is private property. But the police officer at the door finally stepped inside. Actually, Carl, city ordinance says as long as no one's blocking the entrance, they're not breaking any law. The officer gave Emily a nod. I saw the footage. You did the right thing. That's when a woman in a business suit walked in, clipboard in hand, media badge swinging. I'm with Channel 12. Is Emily here? Emily hesitated. I'm Emily. The reporter smiled. The city wants to hear your story. The country, too. You've become a symbol of compassion when so many have forgotten what that means. Carl's face dropped completely. Daniels added one last jab. Oh, and one more thing. We spoke to the local VFW. They're blacklisting this place. No veterans. No support. Carl snapped, you can't do this. Daniels smirked. Watch us. By the next morning, Emily's name was everywhere. The story had made national news. Morning shows were covering it with headlines like, Waitress fired for feeding veteran, Marines respond in unforgettable fashion, small act of kindness sparks national outrage, major influencers, veterans groups, and celebrities began weighing in online. A popular actor who served in the military posted, Emily did what our country should be doing every day. I'm buying her a year's worth of groceries. #respect her, Rosie's Diner. Its Yelp page was bombarded with 1-star reviews. Dozens of local businesses pulled their partnerships. A growing online petition called for Carl to be fired. He went on damage control, issuing a stiff apology video, but the internet wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, Emily sat nervously on a couch across from the Channel 12 news anchor. Emily, the anchor began during the live segment, did you ever think something so simple, just giving a meal to a hungry man, would change your life? She shook her head. No. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because he looked like he hadn't been treated with respect in a long time. The anchor nodded. Well, you've inspired millions. And speaking of respect, the camera cut to a surprise live feed. Gunnery Sergeant Daniels appeared on screen from the local VFW hall. Emily, he said, on behalf of Marines everywhere, and all veterans who've ever been ignored or cast aside, you reminded this nation of what it means to serve others. So, we want to officially name you an honorary member of our Marine family. Emily covered her mouth, tears forming. The studio erupted in applause. And one more thing, Daniels added. We spoke to a few folks. A local restaurant owned by a vet wants to offer you a management position. Full salary. Benefits. And you can feed as many heroes as you like. Emily broke into a stunned smile. The anchor turned to the camera. Sometimes, a single plate of food can reveal the hunger in a nation's soul, and the strength of one person's heart. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Emily barely had time to breathe between interview requests, job offers, and messages of support flooding her inbox. From California to New York, strangers sent letters, flowers, even hand-drawn pictures from school kids that said things like, "Thank you for feeding our heroes. You're a real American." But even in the media storm, Emily stayed grounded. She visited Staff Sergeant Lewis at the small veteran shelter he lived in, bringing him fresh clothes and groceries. He chuckled. I came in hungry for a sandwich, and walked out part of a movement. Emily smiled warmly. You're the reason I did it. I just hope others follow. Meanwhile, Rosie's diner was facing the storm head-on. The local health inspector showed up unannounced, twice. The owner, who had previously backed Carl's decision, now released a very public statement. We deeply regret what happened to Emily and Staff Sergeant Lewis. Carl is no longer employed by Rosie's Diner, and we are re-evaluating our policies with input from local veterans groups. But it was too late. Trust was gone. Across town, in a modest but cozy building, the grand opening of Honor Grounds Cafe was underway, a veteran-owned restaurant dedicated to feeding those in need and hiring those who served. The owner, retired Navy cook Harold "Big Red" Thompson, stood on stage with Emily by his side. She didn't just give a meal, he told the crowd. She gave us a reminder of who we're supposed to be. Then he handed her a brand new apron. This time, embroidered in gold thread were the words, General Manager, Emily R. Service through kindness. Applause erupted. Among the crowd were dozens of uniformed service members, some retired, some active. In the front row sat Staff SGT Lewis, now clean-shaven, his posture straighter, a quiet pride in his eyes. Suddenly, a military marching band began to play from around the corner. The Marine Corps League had surprised Emily with a full ceremonial salute. 4 Marines presented her with a framed certificate naming her an Honorary Marine Ally, a title rarely given to civilians. Daniel stepped up to the mic. We don't hand those out easily. But when someone stands up for one of ours when the world looks the other way, that's family. Emily fought back tears. Later that night, while sweeping the new cafe floor, she looked up and noticed a small plaque near the front door. She hadn't seen it before. It read, "In memory of all who've served. In honor of those who still serve others. Inspired by Emily R." And just like that, one act of compassion, one simple plate of food, had turned into a legacy. A reminder that sometimes the biggest revolutions begin with the smallest kindness. Months had passed since that unforgettable day at Rosie's Diner, but the story of Emily and Staff Sergeant Lewis had only grown stronger, no longer just a trending topic, but a national symbol of compassion, patriotism, and quiet courage. Emily had settled into her new role at Honor Grounds Cafe, but nothing about her life was normal anymore. Veterans from across the country made pilgrimages just to shake her hand. Some brought medals to show their appreciation. Others brought nothing but stories, stories that Emily always had time to listen to. But the impact didn't stop at her doorstep. Inspired by her act, over 200 diners, cafes, and restaurants nationwide started new honor meals programs, offering free meals to veterans, no questions asked. Some called it the Emily effect. The story was even used in schools during Veterans Week to teach students about empathy and moral courage. A sixth-grade girl from Wisconsin wrote in her essay, "Emily didn't wear a uniform, but she fought for someone that day. And that's the kind of hero I want to be." Back at the cafe, Emily had just finished an interview with a national magazine when Gunnery Sergeant Daniels walked through the door, carrying something wrapped in a folded flag. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always," she said. He unwrapped a shadow box. Inside was a perfectly preserved set of Staff Sergeant Lewis's old service ribbons, a Marine insignia, and a folded letter. Emily looked at him, confused. "What is this?" Daniels spoke quietly. "Lewis passed away last night. Peacefully. He wanted you to have this. Said you gave him one final moment of dignity in a world that had forgotten him. That's more than most people ever give." Emily covered her mouth. She sat down slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He was the reason all of this happened," Daniels nodded. "And now you're the reason it continues." After the memorial service, attended by Marines, cafe patrons, and local community leaders, Emily returned to the cafe to find something extraordinary. A local artist had painted a massive mural on the side of the building. It showed Emily handing a plate of food to a man in uniform, sunlight beaming behind them. Surrounding them were faded silhouettes of soldiers, young and old, watching with pride. The mural's title, written in large, bold letters, simply read, "This is what serving looks like." From across the street, an elderly woman watched and whispered to her granddaughter, "That girl changed everything." And it was true. Emily never asked to be famous. She didn't want awards or ceremonies. All she wanted was to do what was right, even when no one was looking. But because she did, the nation looked. And remembered. And followed. As the story of Emily and Staff Sergeant Lewis continued to inspire, it finally reached a place where few acts of quiet kindness ever do, Capitol Hill. A congresswoman from Texas stood on the floor of the House and held up a printed photo of Emily from Honor Grounds Cafe, surrounded by veterans. Her voice rang through the chamber, this young woman didn't have a title. She wasn't a politician, a general, or a CEO. She was a waitress. And when she saw a hungry veteran, she didn't look the other way. She took action. That's what leadership actually looks like. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Soon after, a bipartisan bill was introduced, the Honor Act, offering federal tax incentives to small businesses that provide meals or job opportunities to veterans in need. When asked what inspired the legislation, the congresswoman didn't hesitate, one waitress. One plate of food. One moment of courage. Emily, overwhelmed and humbled, was invited to speak at the bill's signing ceremony. Cameras flashed as she stepped up to the podium, wearing a simple navy dress and a Marine pin Staff Sergeant Lewis had once gifted her. "I'm not a hero," she said to the crowd of lawmakers, veterans, and national press. "He was. And so are the men and women we forget too often. I just gave him a plate of food. What this country gave him in return, should have been there all along." The room stood in ovation. After the event, Daniels approached her with a box. Inside was a letter signed by the Commandant of the Marine Corps, officially recognizing her as a civilian hero of honor, a rare title reserved for civilians who've made a profound impact on military communities. But the most moving gift came later, delivered in a small envelope, with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note, "Dear Emily, I served with Lewis in Vietnam. He was a good man. He talked about you a lot in those final days, said you made him feel like a Marine again. Like he mattered. Thank you for bringing him home in a way war never could." Semper Fi. Emily sat alone that night, holding the letter, thinking about how one small choice, one moment of kindness, had lit a fire across the country. She didn't feed him because he was a Marine. She fed him because he was hungry. And in doing so, she reminded a nation of what service really means. Years later, on the anniversary of the day it all began, Honor Grounds Cafe was buzzing with life. Veterans sat alongside college students, single moms, firefighters, and factory workers. No one asked who you were. The only question that mattered was, are you hungry? At the back of the cafe, near a sunlit window, sat a table permanently reserved. A small brass plaque on it read, Staff Sergeant Lewis, always served first. Next to it, a framed photo of Emily and Lewis sat beside a folded Marine Corps flag. A fresh cup of coffee and a warm plate of eggs and toast were always placed there, every morning, without fail. Emily, now in her early 30s, walked among the tables with quiet grace. She still wore an apron, but now it was her name on the paychecks. She ran Honor Grounds not just as a business, but as a sanctuary. A little boy tugged on her sleeve. Miss Emily, is that the soldier who started the story? She kneeled beside him. That's right. He was the first person I ever served from here. But the truth is, he served us long before that. The boy looked thoughtful. Is that why the food tastes extra good? She smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it's because it's made with something most places forget to put in their recipes, respect. That night, as the cafe closed, Emily turned the lights off one by one. Before locking the doors, she walked over to Lewis's table. She sat quietly for a moment, then whispered, still saving you a seat. As she stood to leave, she noticed something unusual on the table. Someone had left behind a challenge coin, a Marine Corps token used only in brotherhood and honor. Beneath it, a note, we don't forget those who remember us. Semper Fi, from the boys. Emily didn't cry. She just smiled and placed the coin inside the frame, next to Lewis's photo. Outside, the moon lit the street. The sign above the cafe glowed steady and proud. Honor Grounds Cafe, where no one eats alone, and so, the legacy continued. Not on a battlefield or a ballot box, but in a chair, a plate, a story, and the hands of one woman who decided that no hero should ever be left hungry. 10 years had passed since the day Emily handed a plate of food to Staff Sergeant Lewis. What began as a simple act of kindness had become a cornerstone of national change. Emily was no longer just the woman who stood up in a moment that mattered, she had become a movement. She'd gone on to open 6 more Honor Grounds cafes across the country, each one with a single rule carved into the wall near the entrance: if they served, they eat. No charge. No questions. These weren't charity soup kitchens, they were warm, inviting spaces that blended honor with humanity. Veterans who had once been forgotten were now hosts, mentors, and protectors of the communities they had sworn to serve. At the flagship location, now designated a National Heritage Site, a mural stretched the length of the building. It depicted not just Emily and Lewis, but dozens of hands, brown, white, wrinkled, scarred, gloved, tiny, passing plates from one to another. Above it, in golden script, service never ends. Emily never sought political office, but she testified before Congress multiple times. Her voice carried weight, not because of power, but because of lived truth. She spoke of dignity, sacrifice, and what it meant to look someone in the eye and say, "You matter." The Honor Act had expanded under her leadership, becoming a federal program that provided grants to any business that supported veterans in meaningful ways. Her testimony had helped pass that law. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful day, a national memorial ceremony was held outside the original cafe. Thousands came. Marines stood in full dress blues. Choirs sang. Children placed roses at a marble monument with 2 etched names. Emily Rose Thompson. Staff Sergeant Harold Lewis Daniels, now retired, took the stage one last time. Staff Sergeant Lewis fought in a war overseas. But it was Emily who fought a war here, against indifference, against apathy, against forgetting who we are. And because of her, we remember. We serve again. We stand again. He paused. And because of her, no one sits alone. Emily stood quietly at the back, arms folded, tears in her eyes. A little girl tugged on her dress and whispered, "Did you really feed a hero?" Emily kneeled. "No, sweetheart. I fed a man. But he reminded me that sometimes, that's exactly what a hero looks like." As the crowd dispersed, people lingered, taking photos, hugging veterans, sharing stories. The table reserved for Louis still sat by the window, untouched except for a warm plate of food, a folded flag, and a steaming cup of coffee. And there it would remain. Forever. Because in a world that often rushes past what matters, one woman had stopped. One Marine had sat down. And a nation had finally stood up.